There is a moment that comes to every soul who has ever longed for something more. A quiet moment, often in the stillness of night, when the noise of the world fades and a single question rises up from somewhere deep within. What if the life I am living is not the only life available to me? What if there is another version of my existence, fully formed, fully real, waiting only for me to claim it? Understand this, that question is not idle curiosity. It is the whisper of your own higher self, reminding you of something you agreed to forget the moment you entered this human experience. You forgot that you are the operant power. You forgot that consciousness is the one and only reality, and that everything you see, touch, and experience in this world began first as an assumption held quietly, faithfully within the human imagination. Think about this for a moment. Every building you have ever walked into was first a feeling in someone's mind before it became brick and steel. Every relationship you have ever cherished began as an inner conviction long before two people ever met in the flesh. Every breakthrough, every invention, every reconciliation, every miracle the world has ever called impossible started the exact same way, as an assumption held gently but relentlessly in the private theater of someone's imagination. This is not poetry. This is not metaphor. This is law. And the moment you understand this law, truly understand it in your bones, you will never again beg the world for what you want. You will assume it. You will feel it. You will become it inwardly until it has no choice but to appear outwardly. Let that sink into your spirit. You are not a beggar standing outside the gates of life hoping fate will notice you. You are a creator standing at the center of your own universe, and every thought you entertain, every feeling you allow to linger, every silent assumption you carry throughout your day is quietly, patiently working to shape the very circumstances you will one day call your life. The tragedy is not that this law exists. The tragedy is that so few people know it exists, and so they assume by accident instead of assuming by design. They assume lack because it is familiar. They assume rejection because it is what yesterday taught them. They assume struggle because everyone around them agrees that struggle is simply what life is. And so struggle persists, not because life demanded it, but because their own imagination unknowingly kept ordering it from the unseen. You must realize that your imagination is not a toy. It is not something reserved for daydreaming or entertainment. Your imagination is the very workshop of God within you. When the ancient scriptures declared that the kingdom of God is within you, they were not speaking in riddles meant to confuse the faithful for thousands of years. They were pointing directly at this creative faculty inside your own consciousness. The kingdom is not a place you travel to after death. The kingdom is a state of consciousness you can enter right now in this very moment simply by assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. This is why the teacher of Nazareth said, "The kingdom of God does not come with observation, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you." He was not describing a future reward. He was describing a present possibility, hidden in plain sight within every human being who has ever lived. Feel this deeply. Somewhere within you right now exists the version of yourself who already has what you long for. That version is not far away. That version is not waiting in some distant future you must earn your way toward through years of struggle. That version exists now, in the eternal present of consciousness, in a state parallel to the one you currently occupy. The only distance between you and that version of yourself is a shift in assumption. Nothing more. Not luck, not timing, not permission from another person. Simply a shift in what you believe to be true about yourself, sustained long enough, felt deeply enough, until your outer world has no choice but to rearrange itself to match your inner conviction. Consider this: when you assume a state, you are not merely thinking about it. Thinking is fleeting. Thoughts pass through the mind like clouds across a sky. But an assumption is different. An assumption is a thought clothed in feeling. It is a mental posture you take and then inhabit. the way an actor inhabits a role so completely that for the duration of the performance they forget they are acting at all. This is the secret so many miss. It is not enough to think positively. It is not enough to affirm words you do not yet feel to be true. You must assume the state of the wish fulfilled so completely that your entire nervous system responds as though it has already happened. Your breathing changes, your posture changes, the tone of your inner voice changes. You begin to move through your day not as someone hoping for a different life, but as someone who is already living it, simply waiting for the outer world to catch up with what has already become true within. Notice what happens when you do this, even for a few moments. Notice how the mind resists at first. It will show you the bank account that does not yet reflect abundance. It will show you the empty side of the bed. It will show you the silence of the phone that has not rung. This is the great test of every soul who dares to practice this law. The world of the senses will always testify against the assumption, because the world of the senses can only report what already exists in the visible, and your assumption belongs, for now, to the invisible. This is why the ancient teachings said that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith is not blind hope. Faith is the disciplined act of remaining loyal to your inner assumption, even while your outer senses insist it is not true. You are not your circumstances. You are not the sum of your past disappointments. You are not the labels others have placed on you, nor the limitations you once accepted as permanent facts about your life. You are consciousness itself, wearing the temporary garment of a body, moving through a temporary sequence of experiences called time, but never bound by either. This is why the scripture says, before Abraham was, I am. That declaration was not merely about a historical figure claiming ancient authority. It was a revelation of the eternal nature of your own awareness. Before your current circumstances existed, you existed. Before your current limitations were formed, the eternal I am within you existed, untouched, unchanged, infinitely creative. And that same I am is available to you right now, waiting only for you to use it correctly, waiting only for you to stop misidentifying with what you currently have and begin identifying with what you desire to become. Imagine for a moment the person you would be if you truly believe this. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning already convinced, already settled in the quiet knowing that the thing you have been striving for is already yours in the unseen and simply has not yet appeared in the seen. How would you carry yourself? How would you speak to strangers? How would you respond to setbacks that once would have devastated you? You would move through the day like a person who is already wealthy, already loved, already healed, already free, not arrogantly, not boastfully, but with the calm, quiet confidence of someone who knows a secret the rest of the world has not yet discovered. That calm confidence is not something you perform, it is something you become the moment you shift your assumption and refuse to shift it back. The truth is, most people abandon their assumption the very moment it becomes inconvenient. They assume prosperity for a single afternoon, and then a bill arrives and the assumption collapses instantly into fear. They assume love for a single evening, and then loneliness creeps back in the middle of the night, and the assumption dissolves into doubt. This is why so few people ever experience the full power of this law, not because the law fails them, but because they fail to persist within the state long enough for it to harden into their new reality. Consciousness responds to persistence. It responds to the assumption you return to again and again, the one you protect from contradiction, the one you defend against every piece of contrary evidence the outer world tries to present. This is why the title of this very message carries such profound instruction. Keep assuming, not assume once and hope, not assume for a moment and then check to see if it worked. Keep assuming the way the sun keeps rising, the way the tide keeps returning to the shore, the way your heart keeps beating without needing your permission or your belief in order to continue its rhythm. Assumption becomes reality not through a single dramatic leap of faith, but through the quiet, patient, relentless repetition of an inner conviction, held sacred, protected from doubt, nurtured like a seed beneath the soil long before any green shoot breaks through the surface of the earth. Let this settle within you. A farmer does not plant a seed in the morning and dig it up in the afternoon to check on its progress. If he did, he would destroy the very thing he was trying to grow. And yet this is precisely what so many people do with their desires. They plant the seed of an assumption through a moment of visualization or prayer, and then within hours they dig it up with doubt, with worry, with the desperate need to see physical proof before they are willing to continue believing. Understand this. The digging up is what kills the harvest. Not the world, not other people, not bad luck. The unwillingness to remain faithful to an unseen seed while it does its invisible work beneath the surface of your life. The scripture speaks constantly of this principle of the unseen becoming seen through patient faith. It compares the kingdom to a mustard seed, the smallest of all seeds, yet when it is planted and left undisturbed, it grows into the greatest of all trees. Your assumption may feel small when you first plant it. It may feel almost silly against the backdrop of your current circumstances, but size is irrelevant to seeds. What matters is whether the soil of your consciousness is allowed to nurture that seed without the constant interruption of doubt tearing at its roots. This is why the discipline of remaining in the state, night after night, day after day, is not a mere technique. It is a spiritual practice as sacred as any prayer ever whispered in any temple throughout human history. You must realize that the outer world is not the cause of your life. It is the effect. It is the screen upon which the film of your consciousness is projected. This is why trying to change your life by manipulating the outer world alone without first changing the inner assumption that is generating it is like trying to edit a film by reaching into the screen instead of changing the reel. The screen will always show you exactly what the reel contains. Change the reel, and the screen has no choice but to change with it. Your imagination is the reel. Your assumptions, sustained and felt as real, are what is being projected onto the screen of your circumstances. This is why the same event can happen to two different people and produce two entirely different outcomes. It is not the event that determines the outcome. It is the assumption each person brings to the event that determines how it unfolds in their experience. Allow yourself to see this in your own life. Think of a time when you were absolutely convinced something would go wrong, and it did, almost as though your fear had reached out and orchestrated the very outcome you dreaded. This was not coincidence, this was law. Your fear was simply a negative assumption, held with just as much feeling and faith as any positive assumption could be held, and it produced fruit according to its nature. This should not frighten you, it should awaken you, because if the law works this precisely in the negative direction, truly imagine what becomes possible when you learn to direct that same creative faculty with intention toward the life you actually desire rather than the life you unconsciously feared. This is the great awakening so many souls are moving toward in this age. Humanity is slowly remembering what it once knew intuitively before the noise of modern life drowned out the still small voice within. We are remembering that we are not victims of circumstance but authors of experience. We are remembering that the outer world has always been secondary to the inner world, no matter how convincingly it insists otherwise. We are remembering that the God spoken of in every sacred tradition is not a distant being seated on a throne far beyond the clouds, but the very consciousness animating our own awareness, waiting patiently for us to recognize our inheritance and claim it. Recognize this inheritance now. You were never meant to live a small life defined by what has already happened to you. You were never meant to accept every diagnosis, every rejection, every failure as a permanent sentence handed down by an indifferent universe. You were meant to rise again and again and reassume a truer, higher, more expansive version of who you are until that version becomes so familiar to your inner sense of identity that the old version simply cannot survive in its presence. This is not about pretending. This is not about lying to yourself. This is about remembering the truth that lies beneath the temporary appearance of your current circumstances, the truth that you are fundamentally limitless, fundamentally creative, fundamentally made in the image of the very consciousness that spoke worlds into being through nothing more than a sustained, faithful assumption. Consider the story of creation itself. In the beginning, before there was light, there was only the spoken word, and that word was the announcement of an assumption declared with total conviction before any evidence of light existed anywhere, and there was light. Not because light already existed and was simply revealed, but because the assumption of light, held and declared with total authority, produced the very light it proclaimed. You carry that same creative authority within you every single day, whether you use it consciously or not. Every word you speak about yourself, every silent assumption you carry into a room, every inner conversation you have about what you deserve or do not deserve is a small act of creation echoing that same original pattern. The question is never whether you are creating. You are always creating. The only question is whether you are creating consciously with intention and love, or unconsciously, by default, through inherited fears and borrowed limitations. Let this settle within you fully. The moment you decide to consciously assume a new state, you are not asking the universe for permission. You are exercising the very authority you were given at the beginning, the authority to speak your world into being through the disciplined use of your own imagination. This is not arrogance. This is remembrance. It is remembering that the same creative power that formed galaxies and set stars spinning in their orbits lives within your own consciousness, scaled down to the size of a single human life, but no less potent, no less capable, no less divine in its essential nature. Understand this. The reason so many people struggle to hold an assumption is because they have not yet made the deeper identity shift required to sustain it. They try to assume wealth while their fundamental sense of self remains rooted in scarcity. They try to assume love while their fundamental sense of self remains rooted in unworthiness. This is why surface-level affirmation so often fails. You cannot simply repeat words about abundance while your deeper identity still whispers underneath every affirmation that you are someone who struggles, someone who is overlooked, someone who has never quite been enough. The words become hollow because they are not rooted in a true shift of identity. They are merely decoration placed over an unchanged foundation. This is why the real work, the work beneath the work, is always a work of identity. Before you can successfully assume the state of having what you desire, you must first assume the identity of the person who naturally has it. Ask yourself quietly, honestly, who would I have to become in order for this desire to be the most normal, unremarkable fact of my life? Not who would I have to impress, not what would I have to achieve. Who would I have to become on the inside in the quiet architecture of my self-concept in order for this outcome to no longer feel like a miracle but simply like Tuesday? That shift, when it happens authentically, is what makes the assumption unshakable, because now you are not pretending to have something you do not believe you deserve. You have become, in your own self-concept, someone for whom this outcome is simply the natural, expected result of who they already are. Feel this deeply, because this is where true transformation begins. Self-concept is the master key. Every experience you have ever had has been filtered through your self-concept before it ever reached your outer reality. If your self-concept says, I am someone who is never chosen, then even when opportunities arrive, some part of you will unconsciously sabotage them, delay them, or fail to recognize them, because your deeper identity requires consistency with what it believes to be true about you. This is not punishment. This is law. Consciousness always seeks to express what it believes itself to be. This is why changing your self-concept is not a luxury on the path of manifestation. It is the entire foundation upon which every successful assumption must be built. So how does one change a self-concept that may have been reinforced for years, even decades? Not through willpower alone and not through forceful denial of the old identity, but through the gentle, repeated, emotionally embodied practice of living in imagination as the new self, until the new self becomes more familiar than the old. This is why inner scenes played out quietly in the theater of your mind before sleep carry such extraordinary power. In that drowsy, receptive state just before sleep, the analytical, doubting part of the mind grows quiet, and the deeper subconscious becomes remarkably receptive to whatever scene you choose to dwell upon. This is the sacred hour so many spiritual teachers throughout history have pointed toward, not because there is anything magical about the hour itself, but because in that hour, resistance is at its lowest and impression is at its easiest. Imagine in that quiet space before sleep, living for a few moments as the version of yourself who has already received what you desire. Do not merely think about it. Feel it. Feel the warmth of the gratitude that would naturally accompany its fulfillment. Feel the relief of the burden that would naturally lift once the desire is met. Feel the pride, the peace, the quiet satisfaction that would naturally settle into your chest if this were already true. This feeling is the actual substance being impressed into your deeper consciousness. The mental pictures are simply the vehicle. The feeling is the fuel. And it is feeling more than any other single element that determines whether an assumption takes root and grows or withers before it ever has the chance to manifest. You must realize too that this practice is not a one-time event, but a returning. This is why the phrase "keep assuming" carries such weight. Life will present you again and again with reasons to abandon your assumption. A friend will offer a well-meaning but discouraging opinion. A number on a screen will contradict what you have been quietly claiming as true. An old memory will rise up uninvited, reminding you of every past attempt that seemingly failed. In each of these moments, you are being given a choice, the very same choice that determines the entire trajectory of your life. Will you return to the old assumption because it is familiar and supported by evidence? Or will you return again to the new assumption, not because the evidence supports it yet, but because you have decided from a place of inner authority that this is who you now choose to be? This is where so many people quietly give up without even realizing that giving up is exactly what they are doing. They call it being realistic. They call it protecting themselves from disappointment. But understand this, every time you abandon a positive assumption because the outer world has not yet confirmed it, you are simply choosing by default to reinforce the very limitation you are hoping to transcend. There is no neutral ground in consciousness. You are always assuming something. The only true choice available to you is which assumption you will keep returning to again and again until it becomes the dominant, settled, unquestioned state of your inner life. The truth is, the world will always seem to contradict a new assumption before it confirms it. This is not a flaw in the law. This is the very mechanism by which the law protects itself from being adopted by those who are not truly willing to persist. If manifestation happened instantly, with no need for sustained faith, everyone would dabble in it carelessly, abandoning assumptions the moment boredom or distraction set in, never developing the depth of conviction required to use this power responsibly. The delay you sometimes experience between assuming and receiving is not evidence that the law has failed you. It is evidence that the law is refining you, strengthening the very faith muscle that will be required to hold even greater assumptions in the future. Think about this for a moment. Every soul who has ever accomplished something extraordinary in this world was at some point laughed at, doubted, or told plainly that what they believed was impossible, and yet they kept assuming, not because they had proof. Proof, by definition, only exists after the fact. They kept assuming because they had decided somewhere deep within their own consciousness that the assumption itself was more real to them than the temporary appearances contradicting it. This is the mark of every person who has ever bent reality toward their vision. Not certainty based on evidence, but faith that generates its own evidence through relentless, patient persistence. Allow yourself to see how this applies to your own life right now, in this present moment. Whatever you are currently longing for, whether it is healing in your body, restoration in a relationship, abundance in your finances, clarity in your purpose, or simply peace within your own mind, the invitation is the same. Stop waiting for permission from your circumstances. Stop waiting for the bank statement, the medical report, or the silence of another person's response to give you the green light to believe. Assume the state now. Feel it now. Speak to yourself now as though the answer has already arrived, even if every visible sign says otherwise. This is not denial of reality. This is participation in a deeper, more fundamental reality than the one currently visible to your physical senses. Notice what happens within your own body as you consider this. Notice the resistance that may rise up, the voice that says, but what if it doesn't work? What if I assume and nothing changes? What if I am simply fooling myself? This voice is not your enemy. It is simply the old self-concept defending its territory the way any established pattern defends itself against change. You do not need to fight this voice. You simply need to keep returning gently but firmly to the assumption you have chosen, the way a parent gently but firmly guides a child back to the path again and again, without anger, without frustration, simply with patient, loving persistence. This is why the discipline of assumption is ultimately a discipline of love, both toward the life you desire and toward yourself. It is an act of profound self-respect to say, I will no longer allow temporary appearances to dictate my permanent beliefs about what is possible for me. It is an act of profound spiritual maturity to say, I understand now that I am not a passive observer of my life, but an active participant in its unfolding, and I choose from this moment forward to participate consciously rather than unconsciously. This decision alone, made sincerely, marks the beginning of an entirely new chapter, one in which you are no longer at the mercy of circumstance, but instead, quietly, powerfully, at the helm of your own becoming. Let this settle within you as we move deeper still. There is a particular kind of peace that arrives when you finally trust this process completely, and not the anxious hope of someone still uncertain whether the universe will respond, but the settled knowing of someone who has come to understand the reliability of law. Just as you do not anxiously hope that gravity will hold you to the earth each morning, you can come to trust with that same quiet certainty that your sustained assumption is even now working unseen beneath the surface of your circumstances, arranging people, events, and opportunities in ways your conscious mind could never orchestrate through willpower or manipulation alone. This is divine timing properly understood. Not a mysterious, arbitrary delay imposed by a distant deity deciding whether you are worthy yet. Divine timing is simply the natural period required for an inner assumption to fully saturate the subconscious and express itself through the path of least resistance in the outer world. Some assumptions closely aligned with your current beliefs manifest almost immediately. Others, further from your current self-concept, require more sustained impression before they can break through into visible form. This is not because the universe is withholding from you. It is because the seed requires the appropriate season beneath the soil before it is ready to emerge into the light, and no amount of anxious digging will hasten that sacred unseen process. You are not being punished by the waiting. You are being prepared by it. Every day, you continue to assume the fulfilled state despite the absence of visible evidence. You are strengthening the very faith that will be required to sustain even greater levels of manifestation in the seasons ahead. This is why some of the most profound spiritual growth happens not in the moment of receiving, but in the quiet, unseen months of faithful assuming that precede it. The waiting is not empty. The waiting is where you are being formed into the person capable of receiving and sustaining what you have asked for. Understand this too. As your assumption strengthens, you will notice the outer world beginning to shift in small, sometimes unremarkable ways at first. A conversation will happen that would not have happened before. A door will open that seemed permanently closed. A feeling of lightness will settle over circumstances that once felt unbearably heavy. These are not coincidences. These are the first visible ripples of an invisible cause finally reaching the surface. Do not dismiss these small shifts as unimportant. Celebrate them quietly within yourself, for they are confirmation that your assumption is taking root, that the unseen seed is indeed growing beneath the soil, even if the full harvest has not yet appeared. This is the moment when many people, unfortunately, grow impatient and abandon the practice right before the breakthrough they have been working toward. They see the small shift, but because it does not immediately match the full magnitude of what they desire, they conclude that the process is not working, and they release the assumption just before it would have fully matured. Understand this deeply. The final stages before manifestation often feel the most uncertain, the most tempting to abandon, precisely because the ego, sensing its impending dissolution into the new identity, mounts its final, most convincing arguments for doubt. This is the moment to hold steady. This is the moment to keep assuming, not with white-knuckled desperation, but with the calm, settled confidence of someone who has decided once and for all that this new identity is who they are, regardless of how long the outer world takes to catch up. Feel this deeply as we come to the heart of this teaching. You are never meant to live in reaction to your circumstances. You are meant to live in creation of them. Every prophet, every mystic, every spiritual master throughout human history who understood this law lived from this same inner authority. Not because they were somehow more chosen than you, but because they had simply remembered more completely than most the truth of their own creative nature. That same truth lives within you right now, exactly as it lived within them. You are not separate from this power. You are an expression of it, temporarily focused into the particular experience of your current life, but never limited by it. So keep assuming, keep returning gently and faithfully to the state of the wish fulfilled, no matter how many times the outer world tempts you to abandon it. Keep feeling the reality of what you desire until the feeling becomes more natural to you than the old feeling of lack ever was. Keep speaking to yourself with the quiet authority of someone who already knows the outcome, even while the world around you still shows the old story. Keep living in imagination, from the end, from the fulfilled state, from the place where the prayer has already been answered, the healing has already occurred, the love has already arrived, the abundance has already settled into your life as a permanent, unremarkable fact. This is not wishful thinking. This is the disciplined, patient, faithful exercise of the very power that shaped the universe itself, now placed lovingly into your own hands, waiting only for your consistent, courageous use. Somewhere within you right now, the new version of your life already exists, complete, whole and real, in that timeless dimension of consciousness where all possibilities dwell simultaneously, waiting only for your sustained attention to draw them into visible form. Keep assuming, keep feeling, keep returning, until what once felt like only a hope becomes quietly, inevitably, undeniably your new and lasting reality.